A black CEO was forced out of his seat for a white passenger, but the airline froze when his son's ID matched clearance level 7. A black CEO's first-class seat was given to a white passenger, thinking no one would challenge the airline's mistake. He didn't realize his son's ID carried clearance level 7, unlocking authority they weren't ready for. Subscribe if you believe arrogance always collapses when true power is revealed. Dr. Kenrick Vale stepped forward and offered his boarding pass with the same calm precision he used when closing billion-dollar contracts. The atmosphere in Velmora International's executive terminal was polished but tense, expedited security, glass walls, clean light. Behind him, his 11-year-old son Lior adjusted the silver strap of his backpack, the one with his identification card clipped neatly to the shoulder. It bore his name, date of birth, and a barcode tag that blinked a faint blue. The gate agent, Marcus Denley, barely glanced up. He was young, maybe early 30s, clean-shaven with a crew cut and a corporate badge that swung as he scanned the ticket. The scanner chirped, then paused. A red outline blinked around the seat assignment. Marcus frowned. Kenrick waited. Is there a problem? You've been reassigned to 7C, Marcus said flatly, without eye contact. Kenrick didn't move. That's incorrect. 1, it was confirmed 3 weeks ago. Fully paid, priority flagged. Marcus shrugged. The system updated. It's out of my hands. Lior looked up at his father, sensing the shift. Kenrick inhaled, then exhaled through his nose. Who was placed in one? Silence. Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside, Marcus muttered. We have a boarding queue. Kenrick stood still, eyes narrowing just slightly. This isn't a queue problem. It's a protocol problem. That seat is contractual. A pause. Then, without warning, a white man in a pale gray suit brushed past them. He didn't glance at Kenrick or the boy. He didn't speak. He moved with the entitled smoothness of someone used to doors opening. Without hesitation, he entered the jet bridge, the corner of his suitcase tagging the edge of Kenrick's shoe as he passed. Excuse me, Kenrick began, but Marcus lifted a hand. You can file a complaint later, sir. The sentence floated in the air like a challenge. Not a courtesy, not a resolution, just a dismissal. Kenrick's jaw tensed. He looked down at Lior, who now held his silver backpack tighter. The boy didn't speak. His face had gone still, confused but watchful. Kenrick had taught him to read moments, not just people, and right now this moment read wrong. Let's go, Kenrick said, voice quiet but clipped. As they walked past the boarding gate and stepped into the jet bridge, Kenrick's mind began processing. He'd flown this route before, dozens of times. Seat 1, it wasn't just about comfort. It was security, proximity, strategic rest before a summit that could shift the trajectory of his firm's cyber defense division. Seat 1A was never reassigned, unless someone made it happen. And someone had. The jet bridge, air was cooler. The steel underfoot echoed faintly with each step. Lior looked up again. Dad, why'd they do that? Kenrick didn't answer at first. He glanced over his shoulder. Marcus was already greeting the next passenger with a neutral smile, as if the encounter meant nothing. Finally, Kenrick leaned down slightly toward his son and said, without anger but with unmistakable clarity, that's the question they don't want me to ask out loud. Kenrick Vale stepped into the cabin with practiced precision, his son Lior trailing silently at his side, the boy's fingers curled tightly around the strap of his silver backpack. The air in the first-class cabin carried the sterile chill of conditioned air and something subtler, unspoken hierarchy. Kenrick's gaze drifted to seat 1A. A man was already in it. White, mid-40s, trim, pale gray suit, headphones in place, eyes closed but not asleep, smirking, not with joy or politeness, but the smug certainty of someone who had won a game no one else realized had begun. The kind of man who took space like it belonged to him by default. Kenrick's jaw locked for half a breath. His seat, paid for, reserved, confirmed, was now occupied by a stranger who didn't even look up. Welcome aboard, chirped a voice to the right. Gavin Rohn, the flight attendant with the exact tone of someone reading off a cue card, held out a bottle of water like a peace offering that didn't belong to him. In his other hand was a seat reassignment slip. He didn't flinch, didn't pause. Just wave. Kenrick passed with a bright but hollow smile. We'll be underway shortly, Gavin added, gesturing toward the main cabin. Kenrick accepted the bottle without a word. He turned to Lior and gave a slight nod. Together, they moved down the aisle, past 1A, past the smirk, past the silence. Row 7 was quieter, not by design, but by circumstance. As Kenrick eased into seat 7C, he exhaled once, controlled, deep. Across the aisle, a couple murmured softly about layovers and dinner reservations. The world spun on, but not for him. Lior slid into the seat beside him and leaned closer. "Why'd they do that?" he whispered, his voice soft and unsure. Kenrick looked at him, then past him toward the front of the plane where Gavin now chatted easily with another attendant. He bent low, bringing his voice just above a breath. "That's the question they don't want you to ask out loud," he said. Up front, behind the sealed cockpit door, a soft chime pulsed on the console. A silent ping. The system registered an internal clearance notice. The co-pilot blinked. "Odd," he muttered, tapping the notification. But the signal disappeared as quickly as it had come, rerouting itself through a dormant channel. "Probably a glitch," he added, resetting the feed. Kenrick hadn't noticed the ping, but his instincts were already alert. He opened his tablet, not to distract himself, but because he needed the screen to hide behind while his mind ran. Numbers, contract values, cyber defense clauses all scrolled past his eyes, unread. Meaningless. The billion-dollar deal could wait. His mind was stuck on the smirk in seat 1A, on the shrug from the gate agent, on the total lack of protocol. A reassignment like that didn't happen without cause or without cover. His fingers hovered over the screen as if waiting for something else to appear. A question rose quietly inside him. Was I moved or was he placed? The difference was everything. Kenrick shifted slightly, enough to glance back toward the front of the plane. Gavin was now leaning against the galley wall, scribbling something into a logbook, but his eyes flicked toward 7C more than once. Not long glances, not accusatory, but checking, measuring. In his peripheral vision, Kenrick caught Everett, the man in 1A, adjusting his headphones. Only now, they weren't in his ears. They were resting on his shoulders. Listening? Watching? Kenrick didn't know, but something in his gut told him the man had been waiting for this exact configuration. Him in 7C, and the boy one row behind, unprotected. Kenrick's hands curled slightly around the tablet. He could hear every click of the vents overhead, every squeak of the landing gear as the plane taxied. But all of it faded beneath the weight of one thought. This wasn't a clerical error. It was a message. "Can I offer you an upgrade voucher for your inconvenience?" The words came too quickly, too smoothly, as if they'd been rehearsed 100 times. Gavin Roan's smile didn't quite reach his eyes as he stood beside row 7, holding a laminated voucher between two fingers. His posture was casual, but his knuckles were pale from the pressure of his grip. Dr. Kenrick Vale looked up slowly, folding his hands atop the tablet on his tray table. He didn't blink, didn't smile. His reply was calm, almost too calm. "No, I like the name of the person who made the change." The aisle seemed to shrink in that moment. Gavin's smile cracked just slightly at the edges. His gaze wavered from Kenrick's face to the boy beside him, then down to the floor, as if hoping the question would dissolve if he didn't meet it head-on. "I'm sorry, sir," Gavin said, shifting his weight. "That information isn't available to me." Kenrick's gaze sharpened, but he said nothing. Lior, quiet until now, fidgeted in his seat. His hand curled around the strap of his backpack, fingers brushing the silver ID badge that glinted faintly under the cabin lights. And that was when it happened. Gavin's eyes, in passing, caught the edge of the badge. He paused, his brow furrowed, not in confusion, but in sudden recognition. His mouth opened, then shut. His throat worked visibly as he took a single step back, blinking. "Is that your son's clearance?" Kenrick didn't answer. His expression remained unreadable, but something in the air changed. It was subtle, like the scent of smoke before anyone sees fire. Gavin, without another word, turned on his heel and walked briskly toward the rear galley. The upgrade voucher fluttered slightly in his hand, forgotten. In the silence that followed, Lior glanced up. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked, voice low. Kenrick leaned toward him, voice softer. No, but someone just saw something they weren't supposed to. Meanwhile, in the galley, Gavin nearly collided with two senior crew members standing behind the privacy curtain. One of them, a stocky man with slate-gray temples named Rofton Merrick, raised an eyebrow. What happened? He asked. Gavin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped past them to the wall-mounted cabin console, a secure touchscreen normally used for crew updates and flight logs. He tapped in his clearance. The screen pulsed, then loaded the manifest. I need a code check on passenger 7 Bravo, Gavin muttered, pulling up the ID scan archives. There's a badge. Silver core. Looked official. Rofton stepped beside him, peering at the screen. He narrowed his eyes. What kind of badge? Looked like embedded clearance, Gavin said, and it was clipped to a child's backpack. The younger of the two crew leads, a wiry man named Brent Core, froze mid-sip of water. You're saying the clearance tag wasn't for the father? No, Gavin said, fingers moving faster now. It was for the kid. A silence fell in the galley as the crew watched the screen load. Then it flashed once, bright blue with a white sigil. A small line of text glowed underneath. Clearance level 7, variant, directive child. The air inside the galley seemed to drop 10 degrees. Level 7, Brent whispered. On a child. Rofton didn't speak. He stepped back, mouth slightly open. His eyes scanned the manifest, then returned to the boy's ID tag, now flagged on the screen. The data was limited, encrypted, but unmistakably real. You've got to be kidding me, Brent said, running a hand through his hair. That's tied to federal intel streams. Live ones. This isn't an ordinary clearance. This is operational. Gavin swallowed hard, remembering how casually he'd offered a voucher, how he'd smiled without a clue. And it's not the father, he said again, confirming it aloud. The system shows the child as the asset, not a dependent, not an accessory, primary holder. Rofton turned sharply toward the curtain. Does the manifest show any proximity flags? Nothing yet, Gavin said, but I think we triggered something when I scanned the cabin tags earlier. There's a back-end ping that hit the cockpit. They all went silent again. Brent's voice dropped to a whisper. This kid isn't just a passenger, he said, disbelief dripping from every word. He's a protected asset. The cabin air felt heavy, like the pressure had shifted, not just from altitude, but from something unspoken rippling beneath the surface. Everett Vaughn, still reclined in seat 1A, picked up on it instantly. His eyes moved, not his head. He had been trained to notice subtle changes. The way the lead flight attendant, Gavin, lingered at the galley longer than necessary. How the second attendant passed through the aisle twice without serving anything. How neither made eye contact with him anymore. The seatbelt sign remained on long after the aircraft had stabilized at cruising altitude. Strange. Unusual. Excessive. Vaughn's fingers slowly traced the edge of his armrest, calculating. This was not routine. He glanced back over his shoulder, just slightly, disguised as a stretch, and caught sight of them. Row 7. The man and the boy. Dr. Kenrick Vale hadn't moved. His posture was upright, arms relaxed on the tablet in his lap, but his gaze was locked straight ahead with a stillness that felt deliberate. Beside him, the boy Lior stared out the window, his expression unreadable. A picture of innocence. Or was it? Vaughn's instincts hummed. Something was unraveling. Kenrick leaned slightly toward his son, voice low and composed. They just figured out who you are. Lior blinked slow. Do I say anything? He whispered, unsure if this was one of those moments where silence was safer than clarity. Kenrick shook his head once. No, you stay quiet. Let them catch up. Behind them, Gavin's comm device chimed. Just one note, but sharp and immediate. He reached for it, paused, then turned toward row 7. His shoes barely made a sound against the carpet as he approached. Sir, he said with a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the captain would like a word with you. Kenrick didn't look up at first. Then he did, slowly, and locked eyes with the man. Here's fine, he said, voice calm, but laced with steel. Gavin hesitated, the tension visible in the stiffness of his shoulders. It's regarding your son. The air changed. Kenrick's eyes narrowed a fraction, his face still calm, but the heat behind his gaze grew unmistakable. He angled slightly toward the aisle, his voice quieter but harder. You removed me from seat 1A without protocol. Your systems didn't flag me. But his clearance, he nodded slightly at Lior, triggered a federal override. Gavin's throat clicked as he swallowed. Sweat was starting to collect beneath his collar. I wasn't informed. Kenrick didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. Now your logs are frozen, he continued, and so is your authority. The words landed like a weight. Passengers nearby leaned away instinctively, unsure why this calm exchange felt like a command center had just been activated midair. Gavin's hands trembled at his sides. He glanced once toward the cockpit, as if silently pleading for guidance. None came. He turned back, his lips dry, voice brittle. What is your son cleared for? Kenrick allowed the silence to build, just long enough to make the man sweat. Then came the faintest smile. Not cruel, not amused, but knowing. You'll need to ask the Office of Counterstate Defense, he said, voice smooth as stone. Good luck reaching the midair. Captain Norvin Hale leaned forward in his seat, brow furrowed, as the silent alarm flickered across his comm panel. It was the third anomaly in 5 minutes, each rerouted through auxiliary channels, each flagged with the same cryptic code, L7 variant, directive child. Hale tapped the override with practiced precision, isolating the alert from the rest of the flight systems. The cockpit remained quiet, but his instincts stirred. That code hadn't appeared in over 10 years, and never mid-flight. He reran the clearance trace manually. The system hesitated, then confirmed with a blunt, final blink, code validated. Clearance holder confirmed. Identity, Lior Vale. Classification, Federal Child Directive, protected asset. A knot formed low in Hale's stomach. He opened the cabin feed and focused the internal camera on row 7. There sat a sharply dressed black man, still, calm, unreadable, beside a young boy staring silently out the window. The man hadn't moved since takeoff, hadn't raised his voice or called for attention. But that boy next to him now carried the kind of clearance that could reroute global airspace. Hale adjusted the angle, then glanced back down at the manifest. A secondary ping caught his attention, seat 1A. The override log showed a reassignment hours before departure, initiated not by a federal channel, but a private one. He blinked hard. Ever Vaughn. Vaughn had flown before, under corporate clearances, but never this close to federal tier assets. Hale pulled up the override source, a shadow route traced back to a third-party credentialing service used by defense subcontractors. The code used wasn't from any approved federal agency. It was corporate, and worse, it was stealth-authorized. This isn't a coincidence, Hale muttered, his voice low and steady. He turned toward his co-pilot, Lieutenant Ferris Grain, who had been silently monitoring cabin telemetry. Ferris, run a reverse trace on the 1A reassignment. Already halfway through, Ferris replied, his tone clipped. Whoever authorized it bypassed our seat assignment logs at the route. External input, routed through a secure vendor node. Norvin Technologies. Hale sat back slowly. The name rang alarms of its own. Norvin had been on quiet watch lists, rumors of biometric proximity testing, discrete surveillance experiments, and unauthorized exposure probes. And now their associate, Ever Vaughn, was sitting inches from where Lior Vale was supposed to be. Why remove the father from 1A? Hale asked aloud, though the answer sickened him. Because someone wanted the child isolated. Or worse, exposed. He tapped the emergency relay on his panel, encrypting the signal with his personal command code. Secure internal comms, he said clearly. Lock cabin access. Flag seat 1A for immediate review. Ferris turned sharply. You're initiating a breach response? Hale nodded once. Yes. This wasn't an airline mistake. This was a targeted displacement. Ferris blinked, visibly shaken. They pulled a federal guardian off his seat to put a corporate actor next to a classified minor. That's what it looks like, Hale said. And if it is, we're carrying a proximity breach in the middle of civilian airspace. Outside, the sky was smooth, just wisps of cloud at 38,000 feet, but inside, pressure was building. Hale watched as the feed displayed row 7 again. Kenrick Vale, if that was truly his name, remained composed. But the child was alert now, watching everything, processing. Hale knew that look. He had seen it once in an earlier war zone, a child with too much information behind too calm an expression. He keyed in one final command and sent it directly to the cabin systems. A silent lockdown of in-flight seating changes and a full authorization block on passenger interactions beyond basic service. No one was to move unless ordered. Back on screen, Everett Vaughn shifted uncomfortably. The man had tried to play the system, sliding himself into 1A under the guise of elite access. But whatever game he was playing, he had crossed a line. This plane isn't rerouting because of turbulence, Hale whispered to himself. It's rerouting because someone tried to sit too close to a secret. He reached for the encrypted intercom, but hesitated, then withdrew his hand. Kenrick Vale didn't need a message. He already knew. Hale exhaled once through his nose and locked eyes with the feed one final time. He had no idea the child in row 7 would be the reason the aircraft was about to divert midair. The cabin lighting hadn't changed. The engines hummed as steadily as before. But to Gavin Roan, everything now felt sharper, like the quiet had teeth. The flight attendants in cabin terminal pulsed once, silently, with a priority level update. He glanced down. Encrypted system notice. Do not approach child in 7C. Maintain distance. Verify origin of 1A override. No interaction until cleared. The instruction was brief, clinical, and yet loaded with implication. Gavin's breath caught for a second. His eyes flicked down the aisle. There they were, Kenrick Vale, seated like stone in 7C, and beside him, the boy Lior, who was now staring out the window, small fingers resting motionless on the armrest. He looked like any quiet child mid-flight, but clearly he was not. Gavin swallowed hard and tapped his screen once to confirm receipt. His training told him not to react outwardly, but his instincts felt a gear shift. He began to step back toward the service galley when, from the front of the cabin, a soft ding sounded. The call button from seat 1A. Everett Vaughn. Gavin turned, straightened his collar, and approached. The man in 1A was composed, but only on the surface. His jaw was tight, his fingers tapping a silent, anxious rhythm onto the tray table, as if he were calculating a problem no longer producing reliable answers. I want to know why I'm being monitored, Everett said before Gavin could speak. His voice was low, tense. I've flown classified routes before. This feels different. Gavin didn't blink. Sir, may I ask where you received your boarding override? He asked, trying to keep his tone light but structured. That question wasn't in the manual, but nothing about this situation was in any manual. Everett narrowed his eyes, studying Gavin's expression. From a secure corporate terminal. Corporate, Gavin repeated slowly. Not federal? Everett didn't answer. A moment passed like an inch of ice melting in real time. Then, without ceremony, the onboard feed above Gavin's shoulder flickered. Cabin lighting dimmed for a fraction of a second, then resumed. Behind Gavin's eyes, a system notification pinged on the crew's internal channel. He tapped the galley console again to confirm the source of Everett's seat override. The data came up incomplete, then updated. A red security tag stamped across the override request, non-federal origin. Third-party authorization source, Norvalin Technologies. Gavin's spine stiffened. Norvalin Technologies. He remembered the safety bulletin issued months ago, quiet, internal only, about certain vendors suspected of developing proximity-triggered biometric surveillance systems. Programs designed to detect, record, and potentially decode neural activity in real time simply by sitting near a target. This wasn't random. This was a placement. He stepped back from Everett, his face suddenly pale. "Thank you, sir," he said tightly, and turned without waiting for a response. Behind him, Everett's gaze shifted. He wasn't confused. He was calculating, watching the atmosphere of the aircraft shift around him, sensing the sharp angles of suspicion narrowing in. Gavin made his way briskly to the rear terminal. His hands trembled slightly as he confirmed what the logs were already pointing toward. Norvalin's override had been smuggled through a commercial alias, bypassing internal cross-verification because it looked legitimate on the surface. But under that layer, the code had fingerprints. And those fingerprints were built to track clearance-tagged individuals through environmental exposure. They wanted him near the kid, Gavin whispered, his breath fogging slightly on the console glass. They planted him in 1A on purpose. He glanced toward the aisle again. Kenrick hadn't moved, not even an inch. But he was watching Everett with the intensity of a hawk circling a field mouse that didn't yet realize it had been spotted. Gavin looked further back, to the boy Lior, still seated, still calm, his profile framed by the dim afternoon sky through the oval window. Gavin now understood what this flight had become. It wasn't a route. It was a perimeter. Someone had breached it, and they'd done it wearing a suit and sitting in the best seat on the plane. The encrypted terminal lit up again. Update. Initiate trace of Norvaland source route. Flag occupant 1A for surveillance status RE class. Gavin exhaled through his nose and locked the screen. The plane hummed on, oblivious. But the war, he knew now, had already started at cruising altitude, fought not with weapons, but with seats, proximity, and silence. And with one child, staring quietly out the window, they wanted him near the kid, Gavin whispered under his breath. They planted him in 1A on purpose. Kenrick Vale tapped the screen embedded in his tablet with a steady hand, his expression unreadable, his posture still. The soft blue interface lit up beneath his fingerprint, unlocking a command layer that did not belong on any civilian device. With a few rapid strokes of his fingers, he accessed a secure channel and issued a high-priority query. Clearance verification on the current occupant of Seat 1A, proximity match, and risk assessment. The screen pulsed once. Then the reply arrived. Proximity breach confirmed. 1A occupant flagged under federal watch list. Do not engage. Await reroute. Kenrick's eyes didn't move, but a quiet shift passed through him like static tension. He dimmed the screen and slowly powered it down. Across the aisle, nothing had changed. Passengers sipped drinks. Pages turned. Flight attendants whispered softly near the galley. But above it all, Kenrick's mind raced. This wasn't just a breach. This was an intentional placement. Lior turned slightly, sensing the shift in his father's energy. His voice was soft. What happens now? Kenrick leaned closer, lowering his voice so only his son could hear. They're going to try to land early, he murmured, and pretend it's weather. The boy nodded, trusting. Kenrick's hand rested briefly on his son's shoulder, grounding him. Then he looked forward past the curtain toward 1A. In the cockpit, Captain Norvenhale frowned as a redirection command appeared on his console. The order was clear: divert to Westland Regional under the guise of a mechanical anomaly. It even came preloaded with the FAA compliance code. But something about it felt too convenient. Westland, he said aloud, voice edged with suspicion. His co-pilot, Darren Maddox, glanced over. Yeah, Darren said, squinting. That's a civilian strip. No federal post, no patrol units. And we're not due for any ground checks. Hale tapped the screen again. The details were sparse, just enough to look legitimate, just little enough to make a seasoned pilot squint twice. There's no reason we'd land there, he muttered. Darren's voice dropped. Unless someone wants this off the record. That did it. Captain Hale's hand hovered over the terminal for a moment. He thought about the ID ping he'd seen earlier. L7 variant, directive child. A clearance that hadn't surfaced in over a decade. He remembered the chill that went down his spine the moment it blinked across his screen. A child with that classification wasn't a passenger. He was a protocol, and protocol always trumped politics. Hale's fingers danced across the controls as he overrode the diversion order. A new destination locked in, Harvin Base. Once a decommissioned military outpost, now a dormant federal checkpoint with just enough life in it to run containment. Rerouting again, Hale said, his voice firm. Darren turned sharply. You sure? If they're trying to smuggle a classified child asset off-grid under the nose of the government, Hale said grimly, they picked the wrong pilot. Below them, the flight map subtly updated. The arc toward Westland was wiped clean, replaced by a descending angle that cut closer to restricted airspace. Hale didn't flinch. He activated cabin communication locks. The cockpit's radio protocols went dark to external pings, reconfiguring to emergency relay only. Back in the cabin, everything still looked normal. Except it wasn't. Kenrick felt the pressure change, barely. The cabin seemed to breathe differently now. A slight tilt, a gentle recalibration. Not enough for passengers to notice, but enough for someone like him. He looked at his son. They just changed course, he said quietly. Lior blinked. Is that good? It means someone's paying attention. Meanwhile, in the rear galley, Gavin Roan received a silent notification on his handheld terminal. The message, encrypted and terminal specific, was brief. Do not approach the child. Maintain distance. Verify 1A override origin. Gavin's throat tightened. He had sensed something was off since the boarding shuffle, but this confirmed it. The boy wasn't just a passenger. He was the epicenter of something deeper. At the front of the cabin, Everett Vaughn shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes darted toward the attendants, toward the galley, toward the rear where Kenrick now sat quietly, but watching. Always watching. Everett's hand moved to his lap. He tapped his travel terminal again. The corporate clearance overlay he relied on had begun to behave erratically. When he tried to open his uplink to Norvalin's secure channel, he was met with a new error. Access revoked. Clearance conflict detected. He tried again. And again. Same result. Cold sweat prickled his hairline. He turned slightly in his seat, glancing back. Not long, just enough. But it was long enough for Kenrick to see him. Kenrick met Everett's eyes and didn't blink. Everett turned away. Gavin passed between them a moment later, his face carefully blank. But Kenrick noticed the slight tension in the man's grip on the drink tray. He was afraid, and that fear confirmed what Kenrick had suspected since the first moment Marcus Denley had reassigned his seat. This wasn't about seating. It was about access. Everett Vaughn had been placed deliberately within proximity of a classified minor. The clearance conflict confirmed it. He wasn't some lucky first-class passenger. He was a placement, a vector, possibly even a test. And now the system was collapsing. In the cockpit, Hale's eyes scanned the new route data. Harvin Bayes confirmed the silent ping. A security detail was already being assembled. No questions asked. No civilian trail. The captain leaned back. 38,000 feet, he murmured. And someone tried to steal a federal child with a boarding pass. Dylan exhaled. Think it's going to get noisy? Hale looked ahead, calm but cold. It already is. And with that, the flight angled slightly eastward into the classified corridor. The sky was still calm, but the war had already begun 38,000 feet above ground. The airline staff smirked, confident the switch would go unnoticed, unaware that every protocol, every badge scan, and every verification had already triggered a chain of authority far beyond their control. If you believe false assumptions always fold when hidden power emerges, hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. Everett's screen glitched again. The familiar digital overlay, his company's covert cabin tracking interface, blinked once, then vanished completely, replaced by a cold static message. Access revoked. Clearance conflict detected. He sat motionless for a moment, jaw tight, fingers twitching over the armrest. Around him, the hum of the aircraft continued, indifferent to the unraveling power in his palms. The tools he'd relied on, the signals that gave him advantage, they were gone. Not hidden, not blocked, revoked. With mechanical slowness, Everett turned in his seat. His eyes, calculating and sharp, drifted back through the cabin toward row 7. He made direct eye contact with Kenrick Vale. That was his mistake. Kenrick stood. The movement was calm, precise, not aggressive but final. A slow inevitability that made even nearby passengers instinctively quiet. The man who had been reassigned, silenced, and displaced earlier now commanded the aisle with a quiet force that no one dared interrupt. Gavin, the flight attendant, took a tentative step forward. "Sir, please." Gavin's voice barely cut through the tension. His posture was rigid, unsure whether to intervene or simply move out of the way. Kenrick raised one hand. Not fast, not threatening, but full of unspoken authority. Gavin stopped, his breath catching. Then Kenrick spoke, voice even but carrying an unmistakable charge. "He shouldn't have been seated near my son." Gasps didn't erupt, but silence did. Passengers leaned, eyes wide, breath held. Everett rose partway from his seat, bracing himself with a single hand on the backrest in front of him, attempting to summon an air of control. "You're making a mistake," Everett said quietly, his voice tightly wound, a warning masquerading as concern. Kenrick didn't flinch. "No," he said, each syllable measured, intentional. "You did. When you authorized a shadow override to sit within reach of a classified minor asset without full federal clearance." He paused just long enough for the meaning to settle. "That's espionage." A ripple of movement passed through the cabin, men adjusting in their seats, eyebrows rising, tension threading across rows like static electricity. Gavin took a slow step back, face pale, eyes darting between the two men like he'd realized he was no longer serving beverages on a commercial flight, but standing in the center of a federal crisis. Everett's eyes narrowed. "You don't know who I work for." Kenrick's voice lowered a fraction, now almost a whisper, but somehow colder than before. "And you don't know what my son is capable of." The air stilled. No one moved. Lior, small and silent beside his father, didn't shift. He didn't flinch, but his gaze, steady, unblinking, locked onto Everett's. It wasn't the stare of a frightened child. It was something older, wiser, like watching a mirror remember a face it had been trained to detect. Kenrick's tone softened, not in gentleness, but in precision. "He remembers your face." Everett's mouth parted slightly, confused. "And that's all the evidence we'll need." The term began so subtly that most passengers didn't notice. Just a slight banking of the fuselage and a change in engine tone that hinted at a new heading. But to Dr. Kenrick Vale, seated in 7C with his son Lior beside him, it was the sound of a decision being made behind sealed doors. He didn't ask questions. Instead, he leaned forward and adjusted Lior's seatbelt, tightening the strap across the boy's narrow chest. The boy's eyes flicked up. "Do I need to run?" Lior asked quietly, the innocence of the question undercut by the steadiness in his voice. "Not today," Kenrick replied. His tone was calm, but not casual. Every word was deliberate. In the cockpit, Captain Norvin Hale watched the horizon shift across the screen. A soft chime alerted him to a new burst transmission, short, encrypted, and tagged with the signature of the Office of Counterstate Defense. Hale tapped to decrypt, and the message spilled out in 3 concise lines. "Do not permit offload. Secure escorte en route." 1A occupant confirmed attempt to access miner's biometric key. Treat as hostile. Hale read the lines twice, then slowly turned to his co-pilot. "We're not flying a family anymore," he said. "We're transporting a federal asset, and the threat's already on board." His hand moved to the console. "Cabin control, this is Hale. Initiate Shidem Air Protocol. Lock 1A. Use magnetic restraint. Confirm status." Back in the cabin, Flight Attendant Gavin Roan's terminal blinked. The command appeared in bold red. "Protocol 7 our target. Seat 1A action. Contain immediately. Maintain distance from row 7. Gavin froze. His hands hovered above the screen for a breath too long. Then, with a swallow, he detached a small black device clipped under his belt and approached Everett Vaughn in 1A. Everett noticed immediately. His head turned slightly, brows drawing down. "Something wrong?" he asked, his voice calm but coiled. Gavin didn't answer. He knelt discreetly beside the seat, pressed the black device to the underside of the tray table, and activated it with a quiet hiss. The effect was instantaneous. Metallic cuffs sprang from the seat's internal seams, locking across Everett's lap and torso like a coiling serpent. The man jolted. "What is this?" he barked, jerking against the restraints. His hands slammed against the armrests, but the magnetic force held firm. Passengers looked up now, startled but silent, sensing something far beyond turbulence was unfolding. Gavin, visibly sweating, leaned in. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "You were never supposed to be this close to him." Across the aisle, Kenrick remained seated, one arm now draped lightly over Lior's shoulder. The boy leaned into the familiar weight, eyes locked ahead. Lior tilted his head slightly. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice almost inaudible beneath the hum of the engines. "Almost," Kenrick said, without looking away. Everett struggled again. "You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like." But Kenrick finally turned toward him. "I understand perfectly," he said, voice razor-sharp. "You used a shadow override to sit within reach of classified miner. You ran an access ping the moment you were in proximity. That's not a seating preference. That's an attempt." Everett's jaw tightened. "You don't know who I work for." "No," Kenrick replied, his gaze level. "But you don't know who my son is." Every word landed like a weight in the silence. Even the engines felt quieter. The passengers didn't move. Gavin didn't breathe. And Everett, for the first time, didn't speak. Then Kenrick added, almost coldly, "And now they know what you tried to do." Lior turned his head and met Everett's eyes. The stare wasn't angry. It wasn't scared. It was clinical, memorizing, calculating. It unsettled the man in one far more than the restraints ever could. Kenrick's voice softened, but it carried like steel through the cabin. "He remembers your face. And that's all the evidence we'll need." The aircraft continued on its diverted course toward Harvin Base. Nothing outside revealed the storm unfolding within, but the tension in the pressurized silence told its own story. Across the aisle, Gavin remained still beside Everett, now unsure whether to feel fear or relief. The screen on his terminal confirmed the containment had succeeded. Hale's voice crackled through a private crew line. "Hold course. Huffle Smallhoot. Keep all eyes off row 7. Kenrick leaned back again, his fingers brushing the side of Lior's seat in a subtle gesture of comfort and command. "Almost over, son," he repeated, as if grounding the moment. And then, quieter still, more to himself than anyone else, his voice cut the air like ice. "They thought this was about a seat. It never was. It was about proximity, identity, and the secret only one child in the sky was cleared to carry." The first sign was subtle. The cabin pressure shifted just enough for the frequent flyers to notice. Then came the chime, routine in sound, but under its surface was anything but ordinary. Beneath the soft lights and overhead bins, the aircraft was no longer bound for its original destination. The flight path had been quietly diverted. No announcement explained the shift yet, but every crew member had been updated through encrypted bursts from the cockpit. Harvin Base, listed as inactive in public aviation records, had reawakened for a rare and classified purpose. Out the window, the clouds thinned, revealing a strip of tarmac bordered by dense pine and steel fencing. Below, two black, unmarked SUVs idled beside a silver vehicle marked only with a faint insignia. A triangle enclosing an upward arrow, the symbol of the Federal Clearance Integrity Division. No insignia shouted its presence. That was the point. Inside the cabin, Flight Attendant Gavin Rohn stepped into the aisle, holding the announcement card with both hands, his knuckles faintly pale. His voice was smooth but slower than usual. "Due to an unexpected systems check, we'll be landing briefly at Harvin Regional. We ask that all passengers remain seated with seatbelts fastened." Polite nods followed. A few puzzled glances were exchanged, but it was the silence afterward that was louder. One man near row 9, an older gentleman with aviation pins on his jacket, whispered to his seatmate, "That's not Harvin Regional. That's a military base. I trained there in the 80s. Kenrick Vale remained motionless, eyes fixed ahead. He had already known. The name, Harvin Regional, was a misdirection, a civilian-friendly placeholder to avoid panic. In reality, Harvin Base housed dormant security architecture for asset extractions, military reroutes, and covert protocol reruns. It hadn't seen this kind of activity in years. Until now. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and withdrew a small gray badge, thin, metallic, no wider than a watch face. He clipped it gently to the collar of Lior's blue shirt. The badge shimmered when the cabin light struck it at the right angle, not glowing, but pulsing faintly, alive. Lior sat still, his hands resting in his lap, his breathing shallow. "You'll feel a scan the moment we land," Kenrick said quietly, leaning toward his son. Don't flinch. Don't speak. Not until I say so. Lior gave a small nod, his eyes scanning the face of his father for any sign of fear. There was none, only resolve, the kind forged not in panic, but in preparation. A few rows ahead, Everett Vaughn sat frozen, not in fear, but in calculation. His fingers hovered over the now useless interface screen embedded in his seat. The secure uplink used to monitor Lior's ID tag had gone dark minutes earlier. No signal, no access, just a red flashing error. Access revoked, clearance conflict detected. He stopped trying, sat back, stared forward. His breathing slowed, as if conserving energy for something larger. But beneath his calm exterior, his thoughts moved like a machine running diagnostics. This isn't a disruption, he thought. It's containment. They're not trying to stop me. They're preparing to erase the attempt entirely. From the cockpit, the signal had already gone out. Harvin's inner protocols had been triggered. Federal ground units were active. A perimeter had been secured. Entry gates sealed. Runway lights recalibrated for short-range escort units. This was not a detour. This was a verdict. Kenrick's gaze drifted once toward Everett. No words passed between them. But the energy shifted. It was as if both men understood exactly what had occurred, but only one of them had planned for it. Gavin approached Kenrick once more, this time slower, more hesitant. His voice dropped to a whisper. Mr. Vale, are you expecting a reception team? Kenrick didn't look at him. I'm not expecting, he replied evenly. They're under direct order. Gavin swallowed. Is it true that your son's designation? Kenrick's voice remained quiet but firm. You don't have the clearance to finish that sentence. Gavin nodded once, then stepped back into the galley without another word. The crew knew now. Whatever illusions they had of this being a passenger complaint or a system error had evaporated. The child in 7C was not just a passenger. And Kenrick Vale was not just a CEO. Outside the window, the scenery changed. The aircraft's shadow glided over dark asphalt bordered by faded runway numbers and a skeletal tower that hadn't blinked civilian green in years. Now it glowed red. Active. Everett Vaughn hadn't moved. But the shift in his posture was telling. No more finger taps. No more screen refreshes. His eyes were open, but no longer focused on what he could control. Now he was replaying everything he had done. The override authorization. The silent boarding pass injection. The biometric proximity algorithm designed to passively skim data from a level 7 miner. He had miscalculated. From across the aisle, Kenrick leaned in just slightly, placing a hand over Lior's wrist. It wasn't fear, it was containment. A steadying gesture that reminded the boy what mattered most right now. Composure. They're scanning already, Kenrick said. You'll feel in your chest in about 3 seconds. Lior nodded. Should I breathe differently? Just don't stop. Suddenly, a soft pulse ran through the cabin, barely perceptible to untrained passengers. But to those with clearance tech experience, it was unmistakable. An ID sweep had just passed through the fuselage. Lior's badge shimmered slightly brighter, recognized and accepted. Everett finally spoke, almost to himself. They just pulled me into a war. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't confused. It was resigned. Not the voice of a man arrested, but of one who knew exactly what had just unraveled. He stared out the window, not at the SUVs, not at the ramp, but at the horizon beyond the base, at what this failure would cost his employers. The clearance data he was meant to skim. The encrypted neural tag he had failed to capture. And worst of all, the unintended consequence. Now the child's profile would be upgraded, and Norvalin's interest would no longer be secret. Kenrick looked at him once more, no emotion in his eyes. This wasn't a simple arrest. Everett muttered again, softer this time. It was a federal containment of a failed corporate infiltration. They just pulled me into a war. The aircraft's wheels struck the runway with a chirping thud, a brief shudder passing through the fuselage as the jet decelerated across the faded markings of the military-grade tarmac. The descent had been smooth, but the moment the rubber met the reinforced concrete, the energy in the cabin shifted, tense, unspoken, alert. As the brakes hissed and the engines softened to a low growl, Dr. Kenrick Vale reached down without hesitation and unzipped the side of his carry-on bag. With precise, steady hands, he withdrew a flat matte black case. Its surface bore no logos, no handles, only a biometric strip that shimmered faintly when exposed to light. It was not a laptop. It was a clearance vault. Across from him, Lior sat quietly, watching. The boy's wide brown eyes reflected the glow of the cabin lights, but his face remained still, composed, taught long ago how to hide emotion under layers of necessity. Kenrick laid the vault across his lap and pressed 2 fingers against the sensor. A soft click. The seal disengaged, revealing the interior. 3 embedded cylinders holding Lior's identity tag, encrypted medical signature, and a capsule shaped like a flattened stone, no bigger than a child's palm. This last item glowed softly blue. A memory capsule, embedded with neural data and classified access threads. Quantum-level encryption protected every byte. Before Kenrick could speak a word, the cabin door gave a metallic creak and hissed open. Federal boots hit the aircraft floor first. Black, silent, followed by a figure in charcoal tactical armor marked with a badge on the chest. Doran. He was tall, angular, composed, the kind of man who didn't ask twice. He stepped forward, his eyes sweeping the cabin with surgical calm before fixing on the row where Kenrick Saturday, confirming clearance variant, L7 directive child, tag Lior Vale. He said, voice mechanical but deliberate. Kenrick rose without delay, standing between the agent and his son. Confirmed, he said clearly, without flinch or hesitation. The vault remained open at his side. Doran gave a curt nod, not to Kenrick, but to 2 agents behind him who stepped further in, eyes trained not on row 7, but on 1A. Everett Vaughn had already sensed the net closing. He sat stiff in his seat, pale despite his tan complexion, hands flat on his thighs as if obeying an order no one had spoken aloud. Doran turned toward him, eyes cold and unreadable. Contain him. Immediate transport to observation sector K9. Everett's voice cracked out, sharp but quiet. You can't do this. I didn't touch the boy. Doran didn't blink. Intent to extract is sufficient. And your seat override pinged a biometric radius scan. He stepped closer. We have you on internal logs. The agents moved fast. One pressed a device against Everett's chest. The restraints clicked. Metal bands hissed out from the armrests, locking around his wrists and thighs. The tray table snapped shut against his stomach. His protest stopped the moment he saw the 3rd agent retrieve a portable sensor and flash it over Lior's seat, confirmation protocols lighting up on the screen like a cold blue sunrise. As Everett was unfastened and dragged toward the exit, the cabin was dead silent. Not a single passenger moved. Most had turned toward their windows or pulled out devices as shields, pretending not to witness what they knew was extraordinary. Gavin Rohn, the flight attendant, stood frozen near the cockpit wall. His posture was rigid, his gaze flicking between the agents and the boy in 7C. Everett's shoes scraped the floor as he passed Kenrick. This won't stick, he hissed. I'm not the only one. Kenrick didn't look at him. Instead, he lowered himself back into the seat and closed the vault with a soft click. The moment Everett disappeared down the stair ramp, Lior finally spoke for the first time since the aircraft had touched ground. Why did he want me? Kenrick's voice was low, calm, but heavy with everything that had just passed. He glanced down at the case on his lap, then to his son's face, and answered with measured gravity. Because someone thinks what's in your mind is worth more than anything in his bank. The chamber was cold and sealed, buried 3 floors beneath the western wing of Harvin Base. A thin strip of blue light cut across the center of the steel table like a surgical scar, illuminating the faces of 3 men. Dr. Kenrick Vale, his 11-year-old son Lior, and Agent Doran of the Federal Clearance Integrity Division. No windows, no clocks. Just silence, machinery, and consequence. On the wall, a screen pulsed with timestamp logs. Footage from a flight played back in tight loops, the scan of Lior's ID tag, the override origin from seat 1A, the signal Everett Vaughn sent milliseconds before Kenrick had stood. Doran's finger froze the playback at a single, damning moment. The flicker of a biometric sync attempt between Everett's uplink and Lior's tag. "The breach point," Doran said quietly, voice flat but steady. "That's when the signal tried to lock onto your son's proximity signature." Kenrick didn't flinch. He'd seen enough surveillance in his career to know the difference between random and calculated. This wasn't a mistake. It was design. "What exactly were they trying to extract?" he asked, arms folded tightly, his voice a mixture of weariness and restrained fury. Doran turned toward a second display, which opened a cluster of classified documents marked with a triangular red seal. Norvalin Technologies has been conducting covert proximity tests, mapping neural latency and microreactivity in miners who've undergone pre-integrated quantum tagging. Your son wasn't just a child in danger. He paused. He was a live data source. Lior sat still, eyes low, but his breathing had changed. Shallow, rhythmic, like someone trying to memorize every word without understanding it. Kenrick reached across the table and placed a hand over his son's. "They were testing exposure thresholds," he muttered, "seeing how close someone can get before the capsule activates." Doran nodded grimly. "And if they had succeeded, even without contact, the latency field could have echoed your son's neural pattern across an unsecured corporate uplink. A full signature scrape." The words landed like quiet bombs. "But they didn't get it," Kenrick said, seeking clarity. "No," Doran confirmed. "The attempt was detected in real time. The capsule inside his tag remained sealed. The auto countermeasures responded appropriately. All scan frequencies were inverted." Kenrick exhaled slowly. His fingers drummed against the metal. "What happens now?" Doran turned back to the screen, and a new document replaced the flight log. A blue emblem with silver overlays shimmered onto the wall. "Effective immediately, your son's classification is being upgraded. Clearance level 7 remains intact, but his travel permissions are revoked. No more civilian flights. He moves only under escorted federal asset protection." Lior's lips parted slightly. "You mean, I can't ever just fly again?" His voice was small, like it came from somewhere deeper than his age. Kenrick tightened his grip gently. "We always knew this day would come," he said quietly, the words rehearsed in the back of his mind for years, but never meant to be spoken today. Doran remained still for a beat, then continued. "Your next assignment is at Unit Viridian. It's off-grid, eastern slope of the Velden Range. Minimal personnel. All security internal. The transfer will occur within 36 hours under Black Route designation." Kenrick sat straighter. "And I go with him?" Doran gave a curious smile, brief and unreadable. "That's what I was about to say." He stepped closer to the console and typed in a command. A new file opened, brighter than the rest. Kenrick recognized the format immediately. Guardian Asset Clearance. "Kenrick Vale," Doran began, voice now formal. "As of this incident, and under review of the Protection Oversight Committee, you are being designated a federal Guardian Asset. Level 6. The room froze for a moment. Kenrick blinked. His thoughts caught up slowly. "Level 6, he repeated. "That means I answered no one but the directive," Doran said, nodding once. "Effective immediately." The headlines came and went like smoke across a winter sky. Visible for a moment, then gone without a trace. Norvalin CEO resigns amid security probe. No name, no photo. Just a brief statement buried between news of tech mergers and weather updates. No networks followed up. No press conferences aired. Somewhere in the back halls of corporate newsrooms, doors had closed quietly. Leaks were sealed, and a list of questions that once burned with urgency vanished. At the Velden Range facility, elevation 8,200 feet, fog clung to the glass walls of the observation deck. The wind outside was sharp and white with snow, but inside, the world moved with calculated silence. Drones mapping kinetic simulations across a projection grid, surveillance towers pulsing with encrypted signal nodes, and biometric gates that shimmered in green when passed by someone authorized or in red when not. Dr. Kenrick Vale stood near the center of the deck, hands behind his back, his eyes fixed on the skyborne simulations. The light from the monitors flickered across his face, blue, green, then violet. Beside him stood Lior, now wearing a crisp navy vest, a clearance badge on his wrist that responded to his movements like a living extension of him. Was it worth it? Lior asked without looking up, his voice soft but direct. Kenrick didn't answer immediately. The question lingered in the cold air, carried by the quiet hum of machines and wind-blown ice against the reinforced glass. He inhaled through his nose, then exhaled slowly, each breath steady like a man who'd walked through fire and learned to measure every step. Not the flight, he said. Not the summit. Those were distractions. Noise. He paused. But this, his gaze swept across the controlled chaos of the facility below, technicians in black moving like precision instruments, towers relaying bursts of secure data, sky drones weaving between simulated threat patterns. This is purpose. Lior tapped his wrist badge. It blinked in acknowledgement, then displayed a miniaturized topographic map of their current location. No delay, he murmured. Not even half a second. Kenrick allowed himself a faint smile. That's the difference when you're inside the system instead of asking permission to enter it. Lior finally turned to face him. His face still carried the youth of 11 years, but his eyes had changed. They were sharper now, not in the way of fear but understanding. You're not just my father anymore, he said, the words slow, deliberate. You're my clearance handler. Kenrick's chest tightened, not with pride or sadness, but with gravity. He nodded once. And you're not just a passenger anymore. Down below, a new wave of air protocols scrolled silently across a digital wall in the command center. Among them were 3 permanent changes. No seating reassignment allowed within proximity of protected miners. All clearance checks must be double authenticated by federal handlers. No third-party vendor overrides without real-time biometric consent logs. It was called the Vale Protocol internally, never publicized, never cited in open documentation. But every federal-linked airline, defense carrier, and clearance-eligible firm received it. They didn't question the origin. They just implemented. From behind them, a technician named Harvin gestured with a quiet nod. The next phase of training was ready. Kenrick returned the gesture, then turned back to his son. You changed the airspace, he said, eyes locked with Lior's. Lior didn't smile. He just looked back out the window, where 3 drones pivoted in midair as if listening to some hidden signal only they could hear. Kenrick stepped closer, placing one hand gently on his son's shoulder. Because once, a child sat in row 7, and the world learned his name without ever hearing it. The airline froze as the son's clearance level 7 ID was verified, leaving the staff stunned and the CEO's authority undeniable. If you believe real authority enforces respect instantly, subscribe now, because justice always lands first. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights prejudice, assumptions, and the moment accountability and authority confront ignorance. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, respect, and integrity in every interaction.